So now the Photon Hypernova has been released and the new ban list dropping, we have a lot of things to look forward to in this new format, being able to get ready for what decks we're going to play and what we have at our disposal. One of the biggest decks that I'm looking most forward to is playing is Earth Machines, as I think that this deck has a lot to bring to the table, and I would like to showcase my deck list and what has been working for me, and what has been giving me tons of success. One of the biggest things that we look for in a deck, besides obviously whether or not we enjoy the deck and find it a fun, enjoyable experience, is what are some of the competitive viabilities that a deck like this brings. One of the biggest things that I think Earth Machines has to its advantage is a really solid control and grind game. Being able to have tons of card advantage through the use of cards like Bullet Express Train, Machina Overdrive, and Infinitrack Tunneler is one of the things that I think that this deck has really unique in its regard, that you can keep reusing all these resources to be able to accrue tons of card advantage while still having a menacing board that punches through a lot of damage that also keeps coming back from the graveyard, like Citadel and Fortress. Starting off with our Earth Machine package, we start off with the Machina aspect of our deck, and starting with the best starter is Machina Gearframe. When this card is normal summoned, it gets to add any Machina monster from our deck to our hand, excluding itself. It has a secondary effect relating to the Union part of it, but we'll get into that a little bit later. But it's also a wonderful extender with King Regulus. The next Machina monster is Machina Unclansp. If this card is added to your hand except by drawing it, it gets to special it summons itself. And then for the rest of the turn, you can only special summon machine monsters. That's not really a big deal because the entire deck is machines. But when it's special summoned, it Foolish Burials any Machina monster from your deck to the graveyard. And this card is really solid because it helps extend a lot of our plays and also leads into a lot of really useful rank 4 plays. And going into the next part of our deck is Machina Fortress. This card has a lot to it, and this will generally be the card that you'll want to add into the graveyard from Unclansp. So to start off, you can discard machine monsters whose levels equal level 8 or more, and then special summon this card from your hand or graveyard. If this card is destroyed by battle, it gets to pop a card, and then if it is targeted by a monster effect, you get to discard one card from their hand. This card is extremely powerful for leading a lot of extension plays and to basically set up a defense, and not only that, but it also helps us if we're on the back end of a board and need to kind of keep up with it. Into the next part of our deck is actually a really important aspect of it, is the Machina Citadel. One of the cool things about this card is it lets itself get special summoned from the graveyard only if it sees an Earth Machine monster get destroyed that you control. And then when it special summons itself onto the field, it has no effect, but it has a quick effect of you can target a machine monster you control, then destroy it, and then all your monsters your opponent controls get destroyed equal to the attack less than of what the monster you targeted. So this is basically a one-sided Raigeki that also gets to special summon itself whenever something is popped, basically making it a really, really powerful defensive card, but also a really good offensive card when you need that to happen. And rounding out the last part of our Machina monsters is Machina Ruinforce. This card is an absolute beast. It is the card that you use when you're ready to push for game and ready to really hammer it into the opponent's face that they're about to die. The special summoning clause of this card is banishing machine monsters from your graveyard whose levels are equal to 12 or more, and then if your opponent activates something during the battle phase, you pay half your own life points, negate it, and then you have your opponent's life points. A really powerful effect when you're trying to push for game, because this card can single-handedly just kill them. And then even after all that, it has a floating effect of when this card is destroyed by battle or card effect, you can special summon 3 Machina monsters that are banished whose levels are equal to 12 or less. You can only use each effect of Machina Ruinforce once per turn. This card is an absolute house. Keep this in the back end of your pocket for when you're ready to push for game. And starting off with the Infinitrack package is the Infinitrack Harvester. This is essentially the Stratos of the deck, basically the main searcher for all the monsters. But it also has another really interesting aspect to itself, where it has a level modulation feature. And what I mean by that is that you can target another machine monster you control, and then the level of both that monster and this card becomes the combined level, which essentially is just adding both the levels. So if you have this in a gear frame, for example, it will become a level 2 plus 4. It will both become level 6. So this is really interesting for going into certain kinds of XYZ plays and allowing you to go into things that you normally wouldn't have for the turn. So going into the next part of our Infinitrack package is Brutal Dozer. Brutal Dozer is a really interesting card because of the fact that it's a starter, but I guess more of an extender, due to the fact that if you tribute an Earth Machine monster, you can special summon this card in defense position, and then it special summons another Infinitrack monster from your deck to the field, but it negates the effect of those cards. So just a really solid part of the deck to go into more XYZ plays. The next part of the deck is Infinitrack Trencher. It has a primary effect of being able to tribute an Earth Machine and special summon itself. That's a handy aspect of it, but not necessarily the one that you mainly use it for. The main effect is actually being able to Monster Reborn a level 5 or lower Infinitrack monster, and then it special summons it onto the field. Pretty handy for if you need to extend some plays, because there might be already an Infinitrack in the graveyard. Infinitrack Tunneler is probably one of your really solid plays for when you really are going into the long game, and sort of what I mentioned beforehand about why this deck is able to go for really long. Just like Brutal Dozer and Trencher, it has the Tribute and Earth Machine, not necessarily too important, but handy to have. But if it's in the graveyard, you can banish this card and then target 5 machine monsters in your graveyard, shuffle them back into the deck, and then draw 2 cards. This is an absolutely powerful effect for when you're finally to the point of the game where you need more resources and really need to be able to continue having the gas flowing. And this is a huge and crucial aspect of being able to set up, which the deck can do consistently to be able to keep going and finding more cards to be able to push for game. Infinitrack Anchor Drill. So this card is really neat. I actually really enjoy this card for a lot of plays if you need to extend. So if this card is normal or special summoned, it can special summon an Earth Machine card from your hand in defense position. Interestingly enough, it does not negate the effects, so you can just put in stuff like Infinitrack, other Infinitracks, Regulus, the Freight Train. It's really, really cool in that regard. And then it also has a level modulation feature in the exact same way as Harvester. So now that we covered like a good bulk of the Earth Machine package regarding its monsters, we're kind of getting into the miscellaneous parts, the kind of ragtag group of individuals that come into the deck, like the Freight Train and the Gearbox. This is the next part that's also really helpful to the deck being able to grind and extend its plays. Super Bullet Express Train is a really, really, really solid extender for the deck, not only being a level 10 to go into the rank 10s, but it special summons itself as long as there is a single Earth Machine or more onto the field. Do keep in mind that you cannot special summon it if you control a machine monster of a different attribute, so if like Unclance Bear or Ruinforce is out on the field, you can't special summon it. So make sure to sequence properly when using this card. And then during the end phase, if it was sent to the graveyard, you can target 1 machine monster in your graveyard and then put it back into your hand. Really solid card for when you're going for the resource loop. So the next aspect of the deck is the Heavy Freight Train Duracrane, another level 10 extender that kind of works alongside with Super Bullet Express Train. This one does not have the same restriction as Super Express Train, as it does not necessarily care if there's other kinds of machines on the field. It only cares if an Earth Machine is normal or special summoned. You can actually use this card in a really interesting way to be able to chain block if you special summon or normal summon certain kinds of cards. And it also has another cool aspect and feature of being able to pop anything if it is detached, if it was part of an XZ material. Ancient Gearbox is another one of the miscellaneous that we have access to, but this one's a really important part of being able to extend plays further. So if this card is added from the deck or the graveyard to your hand, except by drawing it, you can add an Earth Machine type monster with 500 attack or defense from your deck to your hand. So this essentially is able to add Tunneler, Trencher, and Anchor Drill into your hand. Really handy for when you need a little bit of extra discard fodder for Fortress. Flying Pegasus Railroad Stampede. This card is really good for when you're trying to go for the OTK. So essentially, if this card is normal or special summoned, you can target an Earth Machine card in your graveyard, special summon it in defense position, but keep in mind it does negate the effects, and then you can target one monster you control, and then that level becomes the level of the other. So essentially, you can grab a level 10 and make itself a level 10, for you can make into level 10s. Another thing to note is that you cannot attack except with XZ's monsters, so make sure that if you are going to use this card, it is going for game, because you will not be able to push for game if you are not using XZ's. So Scrap Recycler is a personal tech choice of mine that is not very common in a lot of Earth Machine decks, but is the main reason that I am playing this deck. So when this card is normal or special summoned, it does a Foolish Burial, and then it has a secondary effect of you can shuffle 2 Earth Machine level 4 monsters into your graveyard, into the deck, and then you draw a card. So nice little advantage. And one of the biggest parts about this card is that it's a level 3, which with Infinitrack Harvester level modulates to 5, which is extremely helpful for a very special play that I have been able to work on myself, and give your Earth Machine board a bigger punch when getting to the end board. And then the last of our miscellaneous Earth Machines is Therion King Regulus. This card is absolutely amazing. It does amazing things for this deck, and really only this deck in my opinion. You can target one Therion monster or machine monster in your graveyard, and then you can special summon it from your hand, and if you do, you equip that card to this card. Earlier I was mentioning about how Gearframe has really interesting synergies with this card. Essentially, if you have both of these together, Gearframe becomes an extender with Therion King Regulus being able to give you 2 monsters. And not only that, but also being a way to protect your King Regulus if they do try to destroy him. So, really powerful synergy there, as well as giving your end board an extra negate, which is insanely helpful for being able to have a disruptive end board against your opponent. Rounding it back to the spell portion of our deck, the first card that we want to talk about is Machina Redeployment. This card is pretty simple. You activate one of these effects, you discard a card, and then you get to add 2 Machina monsters with different names from each other from your deck to your hand. And the other half of it is you discard a Machina card, and then you can add 2 Machina cards with different names from each other from your deck to your hand. You can only activate 1 redeployment per turn. This card's really potent, and it's kind of the card that actually gets a lot of your plays started to be able to make a really devastating end board where you can have Cyber Dragon, Infinity, Therion, etc., and basically be able to single-handedly get the entire game going for you. This card's really good. You generally want to save it for last to kind of bait out Ash Blossoms or any other kind of cards that might be able to prevent you to go into your next plays. The next card we're going to talk about is Heavy Forward. This is a continuous spell card, which when it's activated, it just adds an Infinitrack monster from your deck to your hand. Pretty simple. And then once per turn, you can target a Machine XZ's monster you control, then activate one of these effects. You change its battle position, so if it was an attack, it goes to defense, and vice versa. And then you can also attach Heavy Forward as a material. You can only activate 1 Heavy Forward per turn. So really handy. This can be really good for giving your XZ's monsters lots of materials, as well as being another starter to basically get you your Harvester, your Anchor Drill, your Brutal Dozer. And this card has a lot of sneaky applications, being able to go with Super Dreadnought Liabe to give you more materials for you can attack more often, or more materials for Zeus, or more materials for Infinity. The options are endless with this card. It just does a lot for the deck and be able to be a really useful extender or starter. So in addition to this other continuous spell card that we have in the deck, Clockwork Knight is a fairly recent addition to the deck, but really handy. All face-up monsters become machine monsters, so very similar to Zombie World in that regard, where it can sometimes hurt your opponent to go into more plays because they might not meet the type condition that for a specific link or fusion or etc. And then also it is a attack and defense boost for our monsters, while also an attack and defense loss for your opponent, because all their monsters become machines. And then the secondary effect that this has in the graveyard is that you can discard a card, any card, and then you get to add one Earth machine monster from your deck to your hand. You can only use this effect of Clockwork Knight once per turn. Very, very, very handy aspect of it. Really good for being able to push for game and just kind of making sure that you have every little bit of damage that you can use, even for your smaller guys. And also reducing monsters that you wouldn't be able to get over typically because of this card. So starting up in the next lineup in our spell cards is a field spell known as Therion Colosseum. And this card's actually very useful for when this card is activated, it gives us a Therion monster card from my deck to my hand. And then once per turn, if your monster would be destroyed by battle, you can send a Therion card or an Endless Engine aggro system, which doesn't really pertain to our deck in specific, but it is another feature of this Colosseum. And then you can send it to the deck to the graveyard to basically prevent it from being destroyed. And when a monster is destroyed by battle and sent to the graveyard, you can target one Therion monster card in your graveyard and then add it to your hand. You can only activate one Therion Disc Colosseum per turn. This card is really useful as like a really good use of Grand Game in the later parts of the game and the duel, mainly because of the fact that you can keep your really important cards alive while also being able to recur more value. And it also triggers on your side of the field too, so if you crash into them, you can do that as well. Therion Disc Colosseum actually has a really wide variety of applications, from recursion to grind game, and not even that, but also being able to bait out hand traps like Ash. So the next card we have to go into is Urgent Schedule. Quick play spell card, really important. If your opponent controls more monsters than you special summon one level 4 or lower, or one level 5 or higher Earth Machine monster in defense position with their effects negated. You can't declare attacks this card except with machine monsters, not really too big of a downside because we are exclusively machine monsters. And then the other half of it is actually, if this set card is sent to the field to the graveyard, you get to add one level 10 monster to your deck to your hand. So it also floats. Just a really powerful card to basically crack boards, give you extra machines for you can use as more material. This card is really insane because you activate it at the end of your turn, and then you can activate it once again on your turn if you have 2 copies, assuming the conditions are met. This card basically is the same as redeployment, where it basically sets up all your powerful plays where you can set up a really dangerous board where you can also crack their board to make sure that you can keep going into further plays. And even if it does get popped, it still gives you a little bit of advantage going 1 for 1. So rounding out our 6 spells to kind of bring it to a nice little close is our kind of board busting cards, or our advantage cards. These are kind of a flex slot where you can kind of put whatever you find much more comfortable, whatever suits your local meta, or what you kind of prefer as a preference. My cards of choice being Lightning Storm and Triple Tactics Talent. With the new recent iteration of Photon Hypernova, there's a lot of choices that you can make, whether you want to have Evenly Matched or Winged Dragon of Raw Sphere mode. The choices are basically endless for what you prefer. These are just the cards that I like the most in this specific slot because they have a lot of versatility with being able to bait out negations and also providing lots of advantage and being just huge blowout cards if they do resolve. Machina Overdrive is the only trap card that we actually do play in the deck. Target one machine monster you control, then special summon another Machina monster with a different name from your hand or deck, and if you do, you destroy the targeted monster. This card is very potent for being able to have an instant speed access way to get to your Citadel and basically Raigeki their board. And not only that, but if you already have the Citadel, it's a way to trigger Citadel to come back from the graveyard out onto the field for you can then use its Raigeki style effect. Or if you need some other cards, for example, like Fortress to be able to do so, which I do not play this card in my list, but Metal Cruncher is also an option for just some extra advantage. The options with Machina Overdrive are pretty nice, not only that, but being able to provide more grind game because of the secondary effect of being able to target 3 machine monsters in the graveyard or in the banish zone, and then shuffle them back into the deck and then draw 1 card. So once you're done using your Trencher, your Tunneler, and maybe even other cards, you can basically recycle all those cards once again to be able to get more advantage. This is another reason about why the Earth Machine package is so potent at being able to recur so many things and draw so many cards. And starting off with the extra deck, we'll start off with the really simple ones that we all know and understand. Divine Arsenal Zeus. Zeus is just Zeus, but for those unfamiliar, he basically is a board wipe for the deck. The way you are able to summon him is if you battle with an XZ monster, you can use that XZ monster as their material and transfer it over to him. And then a quick effect, you wipe everything and send all things from the field to the graveyard. Interesting note that it does not mention destroy or does not have any other way of weird wording that would get around anti-destruction effects. He just sends them to the graveyard. And rounding out our next XYZ monsters are the trio, the Three Stooges, Gustav Max, Superdora, and Liabe. They all kind of have an interesting interaction with one another, namely Liabe. With Gustav Max, you're able to detach a material and then burn them for 2,000, and then you transfer the materials over to Liabe on top of him, and you are able to detach another material and make him gain 2,000 attack and defense, and then he can declare an attack equal to the amount of materials plus 1 he has. So this is kind of like the combo that you go for when you're going to smash in for game, because it just kills the opponent. Like I said, keep in note that this is something that you go for when the coast is clear, for you can end the game. Or if you're not wanting to go for game, you can have a giant tower with Superdora, because of the fact that it makes one face-up monster unaffected by card effects except its own, and then you can attach it onto Liabe for you can go for game. Getting into the next bit is the Infinitrack Earth Slicer. It requires 2 level 9 monsters, and all the Infinitrack XZ monsters have the same effect of when they destroy a monster by battle, you can use that monster and attach it to it as material. But Earth Slicer is basically your go-to for when you want to go for big plays to destroy a lot of things on their side of the field, because you detach materials equal to how many things you want to pop. It's really handy for getting a bunch of problematic cards in the back row that you might not be able to deal with normally. And another thing that all the Infinitrack monsters have, and the secondary effect, is that if this card is in the graveyard, you can tribute a Machine Link monster and then special summon it in defense position. So an extra kind of extender for when you want to go in for rank 2 plays, but you have something like Anger Knuckle or Platinum Gadget on the field. So Phantom Fortress Enter Blathanir. It's kind of a cool name. Requires 2 level 9 monsters, just like Earth Slicer. But one thing you probably have noticed that I did not mention beforehand is that how do you actually make these monsters? Like I mentioned before with the main monsters, is that you can use level modulation with Harvester or Anchor Drill to be able to get this. Harvester plus Fortress do make Earth Slicer and Fortress. And then the effect of Fortress is banishing a card from your opponent's hand, or one they control, or one from their graveyard, or banishing the top card of their deck face up. And one thing to note of this card, that it does not target, so it does get around cards that do not like to be targeted. So we finally get to the card that I'm most fascinated in explaining to is the Cyber Dragon Infinity. One card that you're actually able to make this, even though you have seen that we do have level 5 monsters to go into the Cyber Dragon Nova, we don't actually have a way to make them because of the fact that Brutal Dozer hard locks you into Earth Machine monsters. So you ask ourselves, how do we actually make this? So this is kind of the spicy tech that I've been working with Scrap Recycler and Infinitrack Harvester. Using them together to make Cyber Dragon Nova allows you to have the ability to overlay onto Cyber Dragon Infinity, which gives you an extra negate because we don't have 3 level 6 slate monsters. It's not something that we have access to. So this is kind of like the thing that I wanted to mention with the Cyber Dragon package. This is really interesting and worth experimenting with because of the fact that you're able to level modulate with these cards, and gives Earth Machines another negate for your end board to be actually a little bit menacing for whatever your opponent might bring towards you. So now we get to Infinitrack Riverstormer. This card is really good. You just attach it and you get any Earth Machine monster and you add it to your hand or send it to the graveyard. This card is absolutely insane. It finds you your advantage, extenders, negates with Therion. It lets you get discard fodder for Fortress. It gets you Fortress. It just kind of does it all. This is your basically main searcher of the deck, as well as being a nice extender. And the last of our XYZ monsters is Gear Gigan X. Just requires 2 level 4 machine monsters, and then you can just attach one to get a level 4 or lower machine monster from your deck to your hand. The secondary effect does not matter to us, but this is also a really important part to comboing into Cyber Dragon Infinity to the endpoint. Going into Platinum Gadget, this only requires a link to of 2 machine monsters, and then it lets you special summon a level 1 or 4 lower machine monster to any of the places it points to. This is really important for being able to get your Cyber Dragon Infinity combo out there, and it's actually one of the main ways that you use Scrap Recycler to be able to get to the next sequence of the combo, which I will have at the end of the video to be able to show how you actually get to that end board. So Double-Headed Anger Knuckle linked to 2 machine monsters, same as usual. Can't be used as link material, not really a big deal because a lot of the time it recycles itself really well, and then during the main phase, quick effect, it can bring a level 10 machine monster from your graveyard out onto the field, negates the effects. And then if it's in the graveyard, you can send a card from your hand or field to the graveyard and then you special summon it. Pretty sweet. I really enjoy this card as it helps kind of set up a lot of plays for rank 10s. And now we go into the next link monster of Ancient Gear Ballista, Link 2. Interesting thing to note is that this only uses Earth Machine monsters, so no Unclaimed Spare or no Ruinforce to go into this. And then furthermore, after that, is that when it's link summoned, you grab an Ancient Gear monster from your deck to your hand. We only have Ancient Gear Box, which I mentioned before what Ancient Gear Box goes into. One other neat trick that you have is that you can pop a spell or trap you control and then turn a monster's attack and defense to 0 until the end of the turn. This card can be really handy to being able to push for damage and go for the OTK if you have access to it at the given time. Being able to pop Clockwork Knight to get another search off. And ending off our entire Earth Machine package is then Infinitrack Goliath. This is a Link 1 that only requires an Infinitrack monster, non-Link specifically, because when it's sent to the graveyard, you can target an XYZ monster you control and then attach it as material to any XYZ monster. One thing to note is that when it's a material, the card cannot be destroyed by card effects. This is really, really important to getting an end board with Cyber Dragon Infinity, for it can be immune, but as well it can be attached to a lot of your other things like Liabe, Phantom Fortress, Divine Zeus. This card is really, really, really powerful, and I really enjoy the applications it has to be able to extend with your Infinitrack XYZs.